good. So, we talked a little bit with the kids today about how today's lesson is going to work. But I think the big thing is, we kind of opened up with this last week, where we talked about, have you ever had something in your life that hasn't gone the way that you expected it? Yeah. And were you ever able to look back at that and see how God was working through that later? Absolutely. I think for me, in my life, was all sorts of things that, in my path towards ministry, how normally the path towards ministry is an 8-year path, and I took a 10-year one. And some of that was through events by design, and some of it wasn't. There was, I ended up doing an internship, and it ended up, instead of being just an internship where I was going to be assisting the campus pastor, I was actually filling in for the campus pastor, who was no longer at the college anymore. That's how I spent my year after college, before going to seminary while I was studying Hebrew. It was such an amazing experience that had a very formative aspect of my life in ministry. There was also in that moment, what ended up happening was, when we got to seminary, you're normally, it's a 4-year plan. Well, there were so many of us that got in there. I was told pretty much right out of the starting gates, yeah, you're going to be here for 5 years. They didn't tell us that a month. They didn't even tell us that a week earlier. But there we were, and so that wasn't what we were expecting. That wasn't what we were planning on at all. But that's how it ended up working out. And then I'm in the vicarage placement office. So vicarage is what we do for an internship. So I'm in the vicarage placement office, and the vicarage placement director says, "Oh, your wife's from Minnesota?" And she was there, and she said, "Yes. Would you like to go back to Minnesota?" "Yeah." And then what did he say? He said, "Man, so you've done campus ministry?" And I said, "Yes." He said, I wondered how this was going to work out. Well, we ended up doing campus ministry in Moorhead, Minnesota, so right on the Fargo, North Dakota border. So we had all that going on, and there I had the opportunity to meet with the daycare, or work with a daycare of 150 kids that was in the building, and most of those rooms were surrounding my office. My office was in the middle of the daycare down in the basement, but it's interesting. And so I assumed, of course, that God's plan for me was to do campus ministry. I was now doing 2 significant campus ministry experiences. Wrong. So I went back from my last year at St. Louis, had a great year, and then found out the weekend before everyone's supposed to get their calls that I wasn't going to get a call because they didn't have enough calls, and some moves were made and things like that, and all of a sudden I was off the list. And about 3 weeks later, I received a call from a congregation in Indiana that wouldn't have been ready to call then, and they were looking for someone who had experience working with daycare ministry. So, and then so on and so forth. 7 years later, I end up at a congregation that is looking again for someone. They were looking specifically for someone who had early childhood background, and so and the rest, as they say, is history. So yeah. That's just my life in the ministry. And of course, you can imagine all those things were bumps and bruises along the way, and there were even mistakes made along the way where I could have been very, and legitimately and rightfully, but instead you submit yourself to the will of God and are able to see how He is doing good things for His kingdom through the struggles that are going on in your life. Maybe you're able to speak to someone in their situation because of the things that you've been through, recognized, but you get to do unique things that no one else would quite be able to do. And I think we all have moments like that in our lives. And so we're certainly seeing that in the life of Joseph. Last week, before we even got into the terrible things that Joseph's brothers did to him, we talked about the ending of the story. And the ending of the story, we're going to begin with this week, is the brothers. Joseph's in charge. We saw that at the end of last week. Joseph is in charge of all the land, and dad has died, and the brothers make up this letter, and they're trying to lie, and they say, by the way, dad said, don't be mean to your brothers. Don't try to get back to them. And he says, you fools. He's hurt, he's crying, and he says, you may have meant these things that you did for evil. God meant them for good. God is constantly working, bringing about his kingdom and working about his good through the most unusual and unexpected ways, often through unforeseen and seemingly impossible situations. All right, very good here. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to start today by reading from Genesis chapter 42. So, Genesis chapter 42. Joseph's brothers go to Egypt. So, when Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, remember, Jacob still believes that Joseph is dead. He said to his sons, why do you look at one another? And he said, behold, I have heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die. So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might come to him. Remember, Benjamin is a son of Rachel, his favorite wife. Remember how he coveted after Joseph and how that made the rest of the brothers jealous? That is, the implication is that's exactly how he deals with Benjamin. He's not going to lose two sons of Rachel. And thus the sons of Israel came to buy. Remember, Jacob's name is changed by God in Genesis 31 to Israel, one who wrestles with God. And so thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the others who came for the famine. For the famine was in the land of Canaan. Verse 6, now Joseph was governor over all the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him, and their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers. He spoke roughly to them. Where do you come from? He said. And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he dreamed of. And he said to them, you are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land. They said to him, you have come to see the nakedness of the land. They said to him, no, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We're all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies. And this begins a game of cat and mouse, so to speak. So they go on back and forth. They're playing this, Joseph is playing this game. And part of what I suppose he's trying to do is test their honesty to see who they are. He really does come to see that these men have gone on to be honest men despite what they have done. The other thing is he's going to try to coax them to bring back Jacob. He wants to see his father, and he wants to see his brother Benjamin. And remember, they have the same mother, and so he's working through this situation just to see what's going on. And as we move forward, let's take a look at Genesis 43. So they come back with Benjamin, and when Joseph, this is verse 16 of chapter 43. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Bring the men into the house and slaughter an animal and make ready for them, for the men are to dine with me at noon." The man did as Joseph told him and brought the men to Joseph's house. And I'm going to go ahead and skip forward just a little bit. All right. When Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present that they had with them, and bowed down to him to the ground, just like the dreams that his brothers would one day would bow down. And he inquired about their welfare and said, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" They said, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is alive." And they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. And he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son." Then Joseph hurried out, for his compassion grew warm for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. And he entered his chamber and wept there. This is it. I mean, by this point, he has been away from home over half of his life. And at the sight of his brother, what does he do? The brother of his mother, he weeps. He still has this love for them, this passion for them. And then and especially for his brother and for his father. Then he washed his face and came out, and controlling himself, he said, "Serve the food." They served him by himself and by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with them by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. So, and then they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at each other in amazement. Portions were taken to Joseph's table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. And they drank, and they were merry with him. So there's a lot that's going on, but the main thing is the relationship is being reconciled. It's being restored. Trust is being rebuilt. And then Joseph tests his brothers in 44. He commanded the steward of the house, "Fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack, and put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, with his money for the grain." And he did as Joseph told him. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away with their donkeys. They had gone only a short distance from the city. Now Joseph said to the steward, "Up, follow after the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid evil for good? Is it not from this that my Lord drinks? By that he practices divination. You have done evil in doing this." So he's going to accuse them of stealing. He set them up. He set him up. And when he went back to you from the land of Canaan, how then could we steal silver or gold from the Lord's house? And then verse 12, and he searched beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's stack. Then they tore their clothes, and every man loaded his donkey, and they returned to the city. All right, so these are some sketchy dealings. And when Judah and his brothers came back to Joseph's house, he was still there. They fell before him to the ground. Joseph came to them. What deed is it that you have done? Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination? And Judah said, What shall we say? By the way, he's saying, I follow the Lord our God, the Lord your God. Yahweh is what they're talking about, the one true God, not the Egyptian gods. And what shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Behold, we are our Lord's servants. Both we and he also, who is in hand of the cup, have been found. But he said, Far be it from me that I should do so. Only the man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my servant. But as for you, go in peace to your into the house of your father. So he tells them to go away. And that he was going to hang on to Benjamin. And all right. So what goes on is a deal is made where he can come back with where his father will come back. And so then verse 45, or chapter 45, verse 1, then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood before him. And so he cried, Make everyone go out from me. So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. So he has all the Egyptian servants taken away, and he went aloud so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to the brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. So now you can only imagine, because of these kinds of things, he is trying to make sure that his brothers are trustworthy, that his father is well. Remember, something evil has happened to him, and he's been trying to test them, trying to make sure that this is safe. He can't hold it in anymore. But because of the way that this played out, and you can see that they live with their own sense of guilt in all of this. When Joseph says, It is I, Joseph, do they say, Yay, you're not dead? The impulse is always to cover up the mistake. It's to always cover up the mistake. And so, now, their mistake is out there, and it's in the open for everyone to see. Because not only is Joseph alive, he's in charge of the world. At this point, he is probably the fourth or fifth most powerful person in all the known world at that time. Because there are very few kingdoms or empires that equal to the power of Egypt. And Joseph is the second in charge. So he's a very powerful guy. He says, Come near to me. And they came near. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves. You sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So Joseph sees it. Joseph sees it right now, here in this moment. He has seen it. He tells them, don't be distressed in your grief, in the sins that you have committed. For God has fulfilled his promises to his people. His promises to Abraham. And he has done that through me. I think it's important in times like this that we look to Jesus. Jesus, who is the salvation of the world. When the world fell into sin, I suppose most of us would think that God would deal with that by entering into the world with an army of angels on swords and with swords in their hands, riding on heavenly chariots, and they would eradicate all of its evil. No, that's not God's plan. God's plan is that he would form a special relationship with an idol worshiper called Abram. He'd send them to go live in a foreign land. He'd have a son that he probably should have never had by any earthly measures. That guy would have two sons that would feud with each other. And from the one son, the youngest son, who never gets the rightful blessing, he would have 12 sons in the most improbable ways. And from them, then would come a nation of people, a tribe of people, who would light the way to salvation. And from that land, through covenants and promises made with King David, and who himself, by the way, King David was a jerk. He writes, God leads him to write amazing psalms that are amazing. The guy was awful. Read the scriptures. Read 2 Samuel and 1 Kings, and especially 2 Samuel. It's clear, David, not a nice guy, and yet God does amazing work through the proclamation of God's name through David. It's incredible. And from his line, and the point is, it's not about David's faithfulness, it's about God's faithfulness. And from his line, nearly 1,000 years later, would come a little baby. And that baby, who would live and suffer and die, would come salvation. And that salvation was meant for you and for me. And through our moments of struggle, and through our moments of challenge, and even in our moments of blessing, God provides opportunity for us to proclaim the wonderful message that Jesus is Lord. Christ is risen. He's risen indeed. Hallelujah. It's a wonderful thing. So, let's go ahead then and... So everyone moves back to Egypt, where they can be cared for and protected and reunited, and everything is good, and they get resettled in the land of Goshen. The famine plays out, and Joseph has sons, and I want to get to chapter 50 of Genesis. This is the conclusion of the Joseph story, but this is beginning of verse 28. I've already foreshadowed to this, but this is really the most important part. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what their father said to them as he blessed them, blessing each with the blessing suitable to him. Then he commanded them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephraim the Hittite. So he's saying, take me back to Canaan. Take me back to the promised land. In the cave that is in the field of Nasapla, to the east of Marma, the land of Canaan. We'll skip through the lineage. Verse 31. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah in the field and the cave that is in it were bought from the Hittites. When Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet in bed and breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. And so, all right, and then let's see. And then, on chapter Genesis 50, then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him, and Joseph commanded his servants and physicians to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for it, so they mummified him, is what they did. And remember, that's the Egyptian practice. And then we're going to skip on to verse 15 of chapter 50. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, it may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, verse 17, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. So Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, do not fear. Am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. I think this is an important distinction to make here. Joseph acts on behalf of God. He loves his family. He cares for them despite the evil that they have done. But he does not act as God. I don't get to pronounce judgment on you. God is in charge of that. I think that this is a lesson that is lost on most people in the day and age that we live in. We try to put ourselves in the place of God instead of living for him. The lesson of Joseph is a call for us to humble ourselves, to not live in the place of God, but to live as his servant, gladly doing his work, even in challenges, knowing that a day will come when we will serve him in blessing, trusting in that day, proclaiming the forgiveness that we have in God. Joseph proclaims that forgiveness long before it is actualized in the land of Israel, because it's not actualized until who comes? Jesus. But already in Genesis chapter 50, Joseph is pointing the way to forgiveness in Jesus. In the same way, God calls on you and me to proclaim that same forgiveness and point the way to our return to the promised land, on the day when Jesus will return from the dead and restore all creation back to its rightful perfection. And so until that day, may God be with you, may he care for you, and may he bless you, now and forever. In Jesus' name, amen.